I'm joined today by Vikram Mansharamani, whose book, Think for Yourself, is subtitled Restoring Common Sense in an Age of Experts and Artificial Intelligence. Vikram, a pleasure to get to speak to you today. Your book is fascinating and very thought-provoking. I suppose the main premise for this is that we've outsourced an awful lot of our thinking, and so-called experts are probably a role that they shouldn't have in our lives. Why do you think specifically, though, this is a problem?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Frank. I'm thrilled to be with you and to share some of my thoughts on this book. But I think the main reason we find ourselves in this situation is because of a problem all of us, I believe, intuitively feel, which is we're drowning in information. There's too much data. And as a result, we're constantly being asked to make choices. And because there are so many choices, we all believe, as is logical, that there is a perfect choice, that there is an optimal decision to be made, that we can maximize the results of our choices. And yet we have trouble doing that. And so what we do is we run headlong into the arms of experts and technologies. And that is by itself not a problem. Where it's a problem is when we do it mindlessly and we don't realize that we're doing it. Because by doing it, by outsourcing our thinking to others, we are giving up more control than perhaps sometimes we even realize. And that is the problem that I'm really trying to highlight in this book, to really approach it a little more mindfully. I'm not suggesting you shouldn't rely on your expert surgeon specialist if you have an issue that requires appropriate attention. Of course you should, but you should do so mindfully thinking about it rather than blindly following.
You're very concerned in the book about the concentration of power in a small number of these kind of tech giants, and I think you go as far as to sort of say, not alone are they influencing the way we're thinking, but they're actually going further. They're influencing the way that we're acting. Can you speak to that, please?
Yeah. So, I mean, look, we all know about the power of data analytics, but there's been some work done on a topic that's now being referred to as surveillance capitalism. There's, in fact, a Harvard Business School professor emeritus, Shoshana Zuboff, who's written a book on this topic. And it's a fascinating topic. And the essence of it is not only are we outsourcing our thinking, but we're outsourcing a lot of the data about our thinking. The clicks you make, the positions you've been, the metadata that's embedded. I know, we recently had this Twitter hack, which profiled or attacked some of the highest profile people on Twitter. Well, it turns out, for instance, each tweet has dozens of data points. Which website were you at before you went to Twitter? Where were you when you tweeted it? What were you reading right before it? What did you read after it, etc.? This allows big data companies to interpolate thinking, and worse, allows them to then change actions. Now, we've seen that at least some attempts of it in the form of election meddling in the United States, supposedly because of Russian activities. We've seen it elsewhere. Information warfare has always been a source of, geopolitical conflict, if you will. But I think when it enters the realm of everyday life and the motivation is profits, you find that somehow your autonomy is being stolen in the name of profit generation. And I have a problem with that as well.
Bringing it back to a more general level, Vikram, is this a symptom perhaps of a wider malaise in society, that we're not as good, maybe as our parents were in terms of the more general aspects of doing things? I'm even thinking about, for example, DIY. And so many of the current generation are just incompetent at doing basic repairs around the house. Whereas the generation might have sort of said, well, these are skills we know about. We know about how to fix this little problem in our house. We know about how to grow vegetables in our garden, and things like this. And in many ways, have we abdicated an awful lot of responsibility and sort of says, well, there's no way I would know that. That's a specialist.
Yeah, look, I think you're hinting at a very important point here. And while I'm not going to refer to as the current, while I will not refer to the current generation as incompetent, I would suggest merely that they've shifted their focus, that they've become narrower, that they've become more specialized. And I would think that's more a reflection of society, the professional domains, the educational environments. We have come to prize narrow, deep focus. The result, as I talk about in the book, is, focus can be thought of as a two-edged sword. On one edge is sort of narrow, deep focus, specialization, expertise originates in that domain. But the other side of focus is literally, ignoring. And so deep focus is equivalent to broad ignoring. I mean, those are similar concepts, right? We would agree those are two sides of the same coin. And so I think what you're hinting at is there's been deep, broad ignoring as we've developed deep focus. And this is true in personal lives as well, right? I mean, we sort of know what we want to do and we let other people do everything else. And so if it's repairing a plumbing leak or, fixing a gutter on the side of a house, yes, that's actually what we've done. We've come to outsource a lot of it. And so, I think the bigger problem I find is that almost like a ping pong ball, we bounce between complete deferral to experts and complete dismissal of experts. And really what I'm suggesting is a more nuanced middle ground, one where, as the phrase I use in the book is one where we keep experts on tap, but not on top.
Mm-hmm. There are situations, of course, where you need an expert. I mean, if you're worried that you have a tumor, you'll want to see a specialist oncologist. You don't want to see the quack doctor down the street. So I think you are, as you say, you're quite nuanced in your approach. That there is a role in some cases for specialists, as long as we're aware of where it's appropriate of specialists, where it is. Yes, yeah.
Yeah, you're right, Rick. So one of the things that I highlight actually very early in the book is outsourcing its thinking is by itself not a problem. And in fact, I refer to, there's a Stanford University professor by the name of Baba Shiv. He and his wife had a cancer diagnosis and they actively chose to give up their thinking. They said, we're not going to think. This is too emotional. This is too difficult. And so I think they spent more of their time deciding who to outsource their thinking to than thinking about the problem and saying, what's the type of person we want, et cetera. Actually, there's a great TED talk he gave about this topic of when it's okay to, give up the driver's seat, I think was the title of it.
Mm-hmm. Does a lot of this come back to education, do you think, Vikram, that maybe the education system has trained us to kind of be specialists or encouraged us to be specialists, and in fact the financial rewards of course are there, and you reference this in the book as well, that the more you specialize, the probably easier it is for you to get the promotions and get the new jobs. Does it come back to the level of where we start maybe in colleges, say at the level of primary degrees? Are we better off maybe starting off getting a general education in something like the liberal arts? So for example, could a degree in psychology be a really good base for your education before you go on and get a much more technical specialist qualification? Any views on that?
Yeah, look, I think you're 100% right to suggest that. I believe that we specialize too early. But let's be honest, there's a reason for it, right? I mean, academics, professors specialize in their research because to get published has become increasingly difficult. To get funding for your research has become increasingly difficult. And so you want to be published in peer-reviewed journals. What's the best way to do that? Over the last 50 years, we've seen an explosion in the number of peer-reviewed journals, right? Because now you can get published in the journal that is explicitly focused on your domain. And so you see more of that. Academics and professors do more research in narrower silos. As a result, they tend to teach the same topics they do research on. There's also this mantra in academia that says we want our students to develop a disciplinary focus. Developing a disciplinary focus, again, means ignoring. So I'm a believer in breadth is as important as depth. And I think it does start in college, if not earlier. Now, to the rewards of specialization, the financial rewards that you just mentioned, Richard, I would argue that, the rewards to specialization are steeper and higher quicker, but not necessarily higher in the long run. And we see this because, there's almost a tipping point where, you're much better off being specialized, but then sort of at some point, it moves towards judgment and, in the domain of judgment and being able to navigate uncertainty, it may in fact be better to have a broad rather than deep approach. And so it's not clear to me in the long run who prospers more. But for sure, I think in the short run, a specialist may.
Mm. You observe very well in the book how interconnected thinking is very, very important, particularly now when we live in a time when we can't predict, and we just see the events of the last few months bear witness to that. You cannot predict things, so you emphasize this need for integrated thinking. Could you talk to us a little bit more about that?
Sure. Look, I think what happened is in this domain that's become so characterized by broad and just a plethora of experts everywhere and every topic and specialists. What has become increasingly lacking, if you will, is the integration across these silos. And so the way I describe it is, all these experts live within narrow silos of focus. And that's wonderful, because if you have a problem in that silo, you want that expert. However, many problems these days are interconnected, where we need to understand the context, that we need to understand that we are painting a mosaic, that we are the artist. And what we need to do is tap into each expert for an appropriate tile, and to take that coloration and sort of that texture and the style and shape of that tile and place it on our mosaic to form our map. And what that requires is the ability to look across these silos, across these experts, to integrate the thinking to form the picture or the map that we need as individuals. And so, that logic is really one of reclaiming control or reclaiming autonomy.
And you also say as well that generalists are probably better than specialists in terms of predicting future outcomes. Explain what you think, what your thinking is there.
So this is actually based on some wonderful research. Philip Tetlock, professor down at the University of Pennsylvania, over many, many years did some research where he evaluated the performance of predictions by experts and non-experts in various domains. And what we found was that effectively, non-experts outperformed experts in making predictions. This was in the domain of political uncertainty, etc. So maybe he had a narrower domain than you might want to know in general. But there was evidence to suggest that actually being more of a fox is sort of a broad thinker rather than a hedgehog, a narrower thinker or a deeper thinker or a specialized thinker, proves useful for navigating uncertainty and making predictions.
That could be particularly interesting, I think, in terms of, say, the financial markets. I mean, there's evidence sometimes that amateurs can do really, really well, and there's even kind of stories of monkeys throwing darts at a dartboard of stock picks and actually outperforming the top experts in the market. It's a peculiar sort of phenomenon, but yeah, there is this thing that the generalists can sometimes actually outperform the specialists.
Yeah. I think one of the things I would highlight is I wouldn't necessarily call it the monkey phenomenon, because that's randomness, which is different than beginner's perspective, right? I mean, that there's some fun things there, but I think
beginner's luck sometimes, yes. Yeah. It's another phenomenon, isn't it?
It's sort of the fresh eyes. In fact, I end the book on this concept, which is sometimes we need to embrace our quote unquote ignorance and adopt those fresh eyes, because that is what enables us to see things in new ways, right? I mean, someone who's been in the same routine, in the same field, doing the same specialization is, for decades, may not have that creative spark that comes from asking what might be deemed a very naive question. And yet that beginner can ask that question, and it can unveil real breakthrough possibilities.
There's also the possibility of groupthink, and isn't this one of the things that was discovered in terms of the financial crash there of 2008, that you'd too many of the same people from the same background, maybe the same genders, in some cases, some people have even argued, in boardrooms, agreeing with themselves, and nobody there asking, as you say, the naive question, why are we investing in all this junk?
Yep. Yeah. Look, I've done a lot of advisory work in the financial and corporate world and helping corporate boardrooms navigate through uncertainty. And one of the things I insist on to help them make tough decisions, particularly because a lot of them have similar backgrounds. They may not look the same. They may come from different geographies. They may be different ethnicities, but from a perspective and experience space, they are very similar. And so thinking about different alternatives is really sometimes quite challenging. And so, before making big decisions, I advise corporate boards and some financial investors as well. I said, what you need to do is have a person whose job it is to be the devil's advocate. We all agree yes, then this person needs to say no. And we need to give them the resources and teamwork and support such that they are in fact able to generate a really convincing argument for why no is a viable alternative rather than the yes that we're pursuing. So that's one thing that I suggest. The other thing I suggest, which has proven useful in numerous corporate boardrooms, is to imagine failure. We all naturally imagine success from our decisions, and yet imagining failure. So think in the future, 5 years, say, I made the decision we're thinking about today, but 5 years from now, it was an utter disaster, complete failure. Why? And then brainstorm the ideas that might have led to that future failure. And just the mere act of thinking about that can help you avoid that failure for those reasons, right? And so that's something known as a pre-mortem analysis. So rather than a post-mortem where we've already failed, I'm saying let's understand the failure before it happens. That's more useful. So let's do a pre-mortem analysis. So that's another.
You're quite critical, Vikram, of investment managers, and in terms of, say, what they're doing in terms of the notional idea of maximizing the return and being obsessed with certain metrics. And you kind of make the point, this doesn't always work to the favor of the actual ultimate investor, because the one thing that they're not factoring into that is all of the fees that they're mounting up. Do you think the investment community is doing investors a disservice?
Yeah, I would sort of correct you a little bit in terms of what I'm trying to express in that section about investment management. Really what I'm saying is investment managers with maximization mantra sometimes miss what ultimate objectives may exist for the individual investor. And so if an individual investor has a goal of saving, let's say a couple $100,000 for children's education years into the future, why is maximization of money, of a monetary amount, the objective? In fact, what we should have as the objective is a maximization of the probability of achieving that objective. And that may result in a very different investment strategy. And so what I'm saying is really the mantra that's sort of come across of maximize, maximize, maximize is in contrast to a goals-based investing approach, which may be more suited to individual investors. Now, separately on the topic relating to investment fees, I have been quite nervous is the way I would say, rather than critical, sort of raising a flag of caution around the religion, and I think religion is probably the right word, that has been formed around passive investing. And the passive investing mantra really is one about minimizing costs. But at root there is a belief that prices in the asset markets are correct. Markets are efficient, therefore don't pay any money for someone to go identify the correct price and do research. So just buy the index, don't buy an investment manager services. Now that's fine if prices are in fact accurate. But what we've seen is that this logic of being a price taker has been shifting as there have been more and more people pursuing passive investment strategies. Stocks have been moving with basically flows. So inflows, all stocks go up. Outflows, all stocks go down. Doesn't matter if they're a good or bad stock. The result is the strategy, which was based on being a price taker, passive investing, has effectively turned into one which is making them a price maker. And so rather than being price taking, prices are right, let me just take it at lowest cost, they're inadvertently becoming price makers because of the influence on the market. So that's just something where I am perhaps, I don't know if critical is the right word, but cautious, because I think this can produce outcomes and results for certain investors that may not be currently contemplated.
You talk in the book, Vikram, as well about reclaiming autonomy, and you have a nice story there about the head of the U.S. Army, General Mark Milley, I think, talking about disciplined disobedience. And I think this is the notion that sometimes you can lose a battle and win a war. Could you talk to us a little bit more about that, please?
Sure. We need to remember what our objectives are, right? I mean, part of the way to reclaim autonomy is to focus on our objectives, not those of the experts. Experts and technologies have tasks as their focus. That's their objective, right? And so, yes, I use a military example because the idea of, winning battles but losing wars, I think, is a very apt analogy to how it sometimes works in this complex world where we're outsourcing so much of our thinking. And so what I'm suggesting is the onus of staying mission oriented really needs to be on us as individuals. We need to retain that mission orientation. Of course, there are plenty of military examples, but let me just take one very brief one where I can share with you a story from the medical domain. Here, let's imagine that you go to your cardiologist and your cardiologist says, you know what, unfortunately, cholesterol levels are getting a little higher than we'd like, but no problem. There's this wonderful statin drug. We're going to give it to you. You're going to take the pill. Your cholesterol levels should drop. We have wonderful evidence that high cholesterol in your blood is associated with high levels of heart attack risk, elevated heart attack risk. And we also know with great research that lowering your cholesterol is possible through a statin, right? We know these two things. So let's say your cardiologist is younger than you are, and she tells you, you know what, I'm taking a statin, and all of my colleagues here in the department, they're taking statins preemptively. This is a magic bullet. Take it. And so you take it. Your cholesterol levels drop. But next year you walk down the hall of the medical practice and you go see an endocrinologist. And the endocrinologist says, well, I'm kind of concerned. It looks like your blood sugar levels are creeping up. I think you're pre-diabetic. Uh-oh. Why is that? Well, it turns out that the way a statin interferes with cholesterol is by interacting with enzymes that are also involved in insulin and the delivery of insulin to manage blood sugar levels. And so you can create insulin resistance by taking a statin. And so here the cardiologist claims victory, right? Hooray, they won this war, they won this battle. But the war was really one of reducing heart attack risk. And that didn't happen because with the elevated risk of diabetes comes an elevated risk of heart attack. And so your risk of heart attack pre and post taking the medication are the same. But that's an example of tasks and missions.
Yeah, so there's a perfect example of maybe siloed thinking.
That's right.
Where it actually works against the patient, and in actual fact, in that instance, a chat with your dare I say it, your general practitioner may actually have given you a more rounded view of your health and what's best for you.
Yeah.
In terms of, sorry, go ahead.
The other thing, really quickly, that's worth highlighting is even it's not just a chat with your general practitioner. It's also asking questions that many of us feel intimidated by experts. They're wearing the white coat. They've got the fancy degrees listed and diplomas. I just had to wait in a waiting room for 45 minutes because they are, of course, much more important in time than I am, etc. And so we feel intimidated. And I think it's okay to ask questions. And I want to encourage people. And the book is intended to be empowering in this way, to enable patients when they say, well, what if I don't take it? What's going to happen? What happens if my cholesterol stays high? What will we know? What will we see? What if I do nothing? Right? What is the reason you believe what you believe, doctor? Is that context applicable to me? If it was 1,700 South American participants in a clinical study that are eating corn all day long, or eating, have a specific dietary or environmental condition that's different than mine, then why should we look at those results and think they're applicable to me? I mean, you may actually engage the doctor on the assumptions, and I think that's okay. We should feel empowered to do that. So, sorry, that was the other tidbit I thought I just raised.
Two of the things that you propose by way of what might actually help in this situation are focus and having multiple perspectives on a situation. Could you talk to us a little bit about that, please?
Yeah. So one of the things, Frank, I definitely talk a lot about is managing your focus. Because when we outsource our thinking, we are outsourcing our thinking often to what I refer to as effectively focused managers, right? And so the technology chooses what you're paying attention to. The expert decides what is important and is the important variable. And so what we've done is we're giving over a spotlight. We're in a dark environment and we're handing an expert or a technology a spotlight, and then we look at what the spotlight points at. What we're missing is what's in the shadows. And sometimes the shadows of the spotlight are the insightful areas. And so it's okay to seek expert input for the shining the shadows, or for shining the spotlight, but we need to pay attention to the bigger picture. So mindfully managing your own focus and understanding when you're giving it up. You know, the phrase, that I love that captures the essence of this and suggests we triangulate through multiple perspectives was really one made by a colleague of mine, a phrase, Joseph Nye, a former dean of the Harvard Kennedy School, says, if you want to know where people stand on an issue, look at where they sit. Now, he was a diplomat at the time, and he was working in the government when he said, you know, it was very clear to see where people stood on any issue based on where they were sitting. And so if there was a conflict brewing with another country, you know what, this person is coming from the Treasury Department, that's where they sit. I guarantee you their stand on this issue is sanctions. Oh, this person is coming from the State Department. You know what, they think diplomacy is the issue. This person's coming from the Pentagon, a military commander. He thinks a military intervention is probably right. So you can see where people stand based on where they sit. That's not a problem. Of course, we want people to do that, but the key is to integrate these perspectives, to use multiple perspectives, because each perspective is limited and biased. And so if each perspective is limited, biased, and also incomplete, then the best way to gain an edge on understanding the issue is to adopt multiple perspectives from people that take a different view of the world.
And allied to that, I think you say, and finally, I think it's what the metaphor that you use at the end of the book is one of the conductor, isn't it? The person who actually is in charge of all these specialist people and can bring together the various sections. Can you tell us a little bit about your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, no, honestly, Frank, I don't know if I can add much to what you just said, which is, it's exactly that. The sort of ideal environment that I see for all of us navigating uncertainty is effectively thinking about us as, if I were to use a sports analogy, I realize it's an American analogy, but you know, football, the quarterback in the football analogy captures the spirit well, but a conductor captures it well in a more universal sense, which is, the conductor doesn't know how to play, may not know how to play the violin, or may not understand the percussion, or may not understand how to do the bass or some other instruments, or trombone or tuba or what have you. But the conductor has enough appreciation of each of their capabilities to be able to form something that is bigger than each of these parts. And everyone comes together because of that integrated logic and produces something that no one can produce individually. And that's really the hope that I would have for all of us as individuals, is that we tap into experts and technologies to harness the power of them without giving up control. Just like a conductor would tap into the appropriate instruments to generate the appropriate sort of music to create that power which exceeds that of any individual part.
Vikram, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Frank, for having me.